it would go from the Cold War to nations of concern, rogue states, to global terrorism. This was all in the disclosure stuff before 9/11. And then objects in space that could be a threat. You hear all this stuff about asteroids and stuff, to playing the final card, the alien threat. At the UN, if you Google it, you'll see that Reagan said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity and peace be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? Eisenhower, the President of the United States and a 5-star general, warned us about. And also Lord Hill Norton, a 5-star admiral, a Sea Lord, said that he came to realize that our entire civilization is really at risk, not from the UFOs or the ETs, but from the secrecy. It's a wonderful opportunity here in London, by the way, for you guys to organize around contact groups in CE5, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, and also disclosure efforts. Because the two powerhouses on the secrecy of this whole subject are, in descending order, number 1, United States, number 2, Great Britain, number 3, everyone else. And you're seeing a document up here I'm going to talk about in some length of what has happened over the last 7 or 8 years with the French Ministry of Defense. And the irony of being the head of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the founder of the Global Disclosure Movement is that since that date, I've been sitting on the most important government document in the history of the UFO subject, but didn't feel I could share it because I didn't want to burn bridges to the Sarkozy regime and the Ministry of Defense officials working with the French government at that time. I feel at this point enough water has passed under the bridge that I can share it, so that's why I'm sharing it here in London and worldwide, and soon it'll be up on our website. The key thing to understand is that there's 2 things going on with the projects that we founded 25 years ago this month. In fact, it's the 25th anniversary of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And it started as an effort to organize people, a citizens diplomacy effort, to end sort of the hegemony of covert programs on the issue and let the average person make contact and be the face of humanity instead of a bunch of petro-Nazis and militarists and warmongers and misanthropic money whores. Other than that, I have no opinion about the subject. And but the whole impetus was the concept of transdimensional physics and the interface between consciousness and non-locality in physics, what Einstein called the spooky theory. All right, we'll get into this a little bit later. And so, you know, by 1991, 92, we had gone to Belgium and had some amazing close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when humans initiate contact and these interstellar vehicles and people show up. And then we went down to Florida and had a group of about 50, 60 people just for a weekend. And as you've all seen in the film Sirius, there were these 4 ET craft that just materialized in the sky. That's the videotape when the guy with the very deep southern accent is going, "Holy damn hot shit." Yeah. I questioned whether I should edit that out of the documentary Sirius, but I just said, no, that's cool, it's authentic, it's cinema verite, so let's leave it in. And so from then on, what happened is that the intelligence community took note of what we were doing. The Disclosure Project was an outgrowth of Project Starlight, which, as many of you may know, was the initiative that I started that then Lawrence Rockefeller played a support role in, not a primary role in, to brief the Clinton administration, etc. In December of 1993, independent from anything Lawrence Rockefeller wanted to do, I was asked to brief the sitting director of the CIA in the United States. My wife, who is here, Emily, thank you. Emily, by the way, we definitely wouldn't be here without my wife, Emily. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, we just had our 36th anniversary. Yeah, I know. Cool. But the people, who started this project with me, we never thought it would be of that much interest to the government because there's really a citizen's effort. But by the time President Clinton got elected and was in office, the folks who were his senior national security advisors in Inner Circle had been contacted by people following my work and said, this is really happening. And they knew in the intelligence community that we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact, meaning non-locality in consciousness, coherent thought, like Lazar is a coherent light. We're going to talk about this. And transdimensional physics, how interstellar systems interface with coherent thought. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook said his next thing he wants to work on is how to actuate the technologies with thought. So a lot of people are picking up on this concept 25 years later. But if you're dealing with interstellar civilizations, they figured this all out a few thousand years ago, a few million years ago, maybe 10 million years ago. And the universe is 14 billion years old, so who knows how long ago some of these civilizations have figured out these technologies. All I can say is they work. And they work because, as I shared with the CIA director's wife at dinner, you can't get there from here, as we say in Maine. You cannot communicate using the speed of light across interstellar distances. You have to drop out of 3D, 4D, go into transdimensional physics. And if you go into these other dimensions, you are interfacing with the realm of thought, consciousness, thought forms, etc., and so on very quickly. So all of these civilizations have figured that out. And in a way, it was a shocking concept 25 years ago, except if you looked at the research, there were a lot of people who were doing things with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, Stanford Research International, doing remote viewing, people like Ingo Swann, who is a friend of mine, some of you may have heard the name, David Morehouse, others. And what they found was that, in fact, those systems work, and Dr. Bob John, J-A-H-N at Princeton, a professor of engineering, found that actually if you put your awareness on a random number generation, you can shift, whether it's putting out zeros or ones. And that if two people who love each other or are united do it, it's an exponential increase. And this has been reproducible over and over and over again in many scientific models, even though it flies in the face of the conventional reductionist linear 3-4D model. So in the upper echelons, or I should say deeper echelons, of the intelligence community and military and also academia, this is really well understood. It's only the mainstream media and sort of the mediocre academics and mediocre government people who don't understand this. But the exceptional folks do. So when we started experimenting with this, and boom, it immediately got on the radar scope of the intelligence community, much to my chagrin. And we were approached by some folks who first threatened me, and I told them under no uncertain terms I cannot be threatened or bought off or intimidated. I basically said, go away. But they persisted, and what we have found is that whatever we have tried to do for disclosure and contact, there's a countermeasure that gets created by the intelligence community. And this is true at the level of presidential intelligence and even folks who direct, your government and MI5, MI6, your Ministry of Defense head. And as you all know, Lord Hill Norton, everybody familiar with Lord Hill Norton, he'd been your MOD head years ago. And when I was at his cottage here in Hampshire, he says, the whole time that I was head of the Ministry of Defense, and of course MI5 and MI6 by extension, you don't have a separate CIA director type person, I was never told anything about this. I only found out about this after the fact. And he was very upset about it. And most people would assume someone at that level of your intelligence community or your Ministry of Defense, major G7 country, group of 7 country, top economy in the world, would be knowledgeable and would be pulled into the briefings on this subject. But they are not. And the same is true in the United States, for the most part. Now, people say, well, why is it that some CIA directors have known and others haven't? And some MOD folks have known and others haven't. And I always point out, it has nothing to do with your rank, nothing to do with your position, nothing to do whether you're a doctor, a PhD, an MD, and in this case also an admiral in the Ministry of Defense. It's all based on whether you are going to go along with the agenda. No, not the alien agenda. The agenda of secrecy. Because this subject, as you all know, once disclosed properly and in a hopeful and productive way, would leave no aspect of life on this planet unchanged, up to and including the complete rearrangement of our macroeconomic system, our energy system, political system, social system, and ultimately major religious systems and thought. That, of course, is enough to keep the brakes on anything, because as a very interesting guy at the Jet Propulsion Labs once told me, he said, you know, he was talking about these obelisks and other objects on the moon, on Mars, and some of the other structures out there, which do exist, by the way. And Buzz Aldrin even recently called for going back to Mars to investigate them, right? You may not know that, he did. And, but this guy at JPL said, you know, we can't disclose that to the public. I said, why not? It's old stuff. These are old structures, millions of years old. This is not something a few thousand years old. He said, because it would show the ancient connection between other civilizations and the development of intelligent life on Earth, and that would collapse the foundations of every fundamentalist orthodox belief system of every religion on Earth. I said, well, good. He says, no, you don't understand. There's a lot of power there. This big of a change they do not want to see happen. All right? So you have that aspect of it. Let's call it the paradigm shift on a deep philosophical, spiritual level. Then you have the shift that would be on the level of the macroeconomic system, which the system of look, these lights and everything here is running off of 1940s atomic power, if you have a nuclear power plant, or late 1800s fossil fuels, right? So we basically have a civilization that its entire system is running on a 70 to a 120-year-old paradigm of energy and a macroeconomic system that goes with it. So if you change that, you have to be prepared for the biggest change in the history of the human race. I estimate that everything that is from the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s to now would be eclipsed by an order of magnitude 10-fold greater within 20 years of the disclosure of this information and the technologies that are attendant to it, that pull energy out of the zero-point energy field and allow for the Z plane of travel, levitation, boom. So there it is. Peter Thiel, one of the co-founders of the PayPal with Elon Musk, who now has, as you know, the Tesla Motors, said recently in an interview on CNN, basically there have been no technological developments in 50, 60 years of any consequence. It still takes you the same amount of time to go from JFK to Heathrow now as it did in 1964 on a Boeing 707 instead of the Airbus 380. Same thing. And so when you look at that, this is always a shocker to people who say, I'm working the high-tech industry. I said, we don't have any high-tech industry on planet Earth. And as Michio Kaku points out, we're not even a level 1 civilization. We're level 0. Level 1 is you're living peacefully and not cannibalizing your biosphere and has sustainable energy systems that don't damage the environment. That's level 1. So we're level 0. Now our group is going out, initiating contact with civilizations that are at level 300. Get it? Okay, so it's so there is a bit of a gap. We have some splaining to do, but actually that gap can be closed very quickly once people stop lying about this issue. And this is why the intelligence community became so interested. And it wasn't because of the concept of disclosure per se, it was the vision of interplanetary contact, interstellar contact. And that's why the French Ministry of Defense contacted us. Just the same reason that the intelligence community in the United States did so. They were extremely interested in how is contact made, and they vowed to embark on a long-term journey to do just that for peaceful purposes. This is why this is, we'll go through this in a moment, this is the most important document ever written from a government entity. And the attachment is even more astonishing, which is an attachment of all the protocols to be used as contact is made and how it's evaluated, with the full resources of the Ministry of Defense of France. Why is that important? Because it's a baby step of a major country doing something that should have happened in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, had there not been a complete subversion by covert military interests, which Eisenhower, the President of the United States, and a five-star general warned us about. And also Lord Hill Norton, a five-star admiral, a Sea Lord, said that he came to realize that our entire civilization is really at risk, not from the UFOs or the ETs, but from the secrecy. The first director of the CIA, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the first CIA director, I have a letter that's up on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, S-I-R-I-U-S, disclosure.com, that is from him, where he states that the secrecy attending this issue is a grave threat because the folks who have created the secrecy do not have the best interests of the United States or the United Kingdom or of humanity in interest. They have the most venal interest at heart, and that is global control and domination through a centralized macroeconomic system where pretty much most folks don't realize this. You know, we think we abolished slavery in the mid-1800s. We didn't. It's just the American plantation is a little nicer than the one in the Congo. But there is a masters and slaves mentality amongst the uber elites that control hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of assets that require a centralized petrodollar system and a centralized energy system, which has been an obsolete paradigm for well on 100 years now. So this information coming out isn't just about are we alone in the universe or not. Most conventional astrophysicists agree that we're not. Now, where they disagree is that they would have the ability to get to Earth, because being the egomaniacs most academics are, and scientists in general, with all due respect to any scientists here, every generation thinks that they know everything. So they can't imagine there'd be a civilization so far advanced beyond us that they could get from 4 or 5 million light years away to here. But that's exactly, I'm going to show you a picture later of an interstellar ambassador who did just that from the Andromeda galaxy. And so I'm going to show you the most important document and also the most important picture in the history of the UFO subject and how that happened tonight. Now, all of that brings up this question of if the governments of the world don't do this, then the people should. And that's what I concluded in the 1990s, that the people lead, the leaders will have to follow eventually. But it isn't going to be through passivity. You're going to have to organize your own contact teams, which Mark here in England has done and gone out. You're going to have to organize your own disclosure witnesses who are deep whistleblowers in your Ministry of Defense and MI5 and MI6. And you're going to have to encourage the government to try to begin to catch up with what the French are doing, and which a government I cannot discuss because it's a negotiation and process is about to launch on, but it's one of the most important countries in the world, not American or UK or French. You can go guess. There are a few. So, and also they're wanting to push hard on bringing out the technologies. Now, we hope their prime minister doesn't get assassinated trying, but you know, and believe me, the threats that I get on a weekly basis into my project is, you know, amazing. But these people in governmental positions need to take the responsibility, and you need to hold their feet to the fire if they don't. And then take matters into your own hands. By the way, isn't there a bloke named Gary McKinnon or something like that here in the UK? After the Disclosure Project events in 2001, this young lad decided he'd start digging into this subject and hacked into some computers. And he got prosecuted. They tried to extradite him to the United States. I reached out to his attorney and said, look, you're arguing this all on the wrong merits. All on the wrong merits. Anybody in here who's a whistleblower, listen, and everyone online listening, I know there are people listening in these divisions, classified above top secret, unacknowledged projects, are listening to this. Do not buy into the legality of the national security orders and oaths related to this subject. They're all null and void. We vitiated them back in 1998. They were completely vitiated because we were able to prove that both in your country and in the United States, the president, the director of the CIA, the top people at the Pentagon and the intelligence, the J2, head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is as big as the CIA, but is its own in-house thing at the Pentagon, all of whom I personally briefed, every single one of them to a man, and including your Lord Hill Norton, had been denied access to these projects. A priori, the projects are unconstitutional and they're illegal. And if they're illegal, the rule of law does not pertain to the operations attending thereto. Got it? Yeah. Therefore, anyone who wishes to step forward, documents, material, biologicals, technologies, they are free to do so without penalty of law, because the operations themselves are illegal. Now, when I got threatened in 1991, 92, 93 by some folks from the agency and the FBI doing what I was doing, I said, really? Come put on the bracelets. You want to get on the dance floor? Let's get on the dance floor right fucking now. Excuse my French. Because I will clean your clock if this goes to trial and you try to put me in prison, because I will be able to then hit subpoenas to this CIA director I briefed, and to these generals, and to these admirals, and to your MOD head. And when they testify that we don't know anything about these projects, they're unacknowledged special access projects which are illegal, I'm going to have you point, set, match. So just stay out of my way. And they did, because I haven't been imprisoned. And I put on the street many, many top secret documents. Now, that's what Gary McKinnon's lawyer should have argued. He argued all the wrong things, completely untutored on what the constitutional theories are for the Disclosure Project. Does this make sense? Now, when we went from Project Starlight, which was the initiative, and the documents are up on our website. By the way, the AP sued, the Associated Press sued the Clinton Library to get them released. And they are released officially. Signed by myself and a bunch of cosmonauts and astronauts and former KGB people from all over the world, saying, lead this effort to end the secrecy, et cetera, and so on. When I realized that the president wouldn't act, the Congress wouldn't act, then I said, then we're going to act. That's how the Disclosure Project happened. It was the default position. The first was offered to our leaders, including your own. And by the way, there's a guy named Nick Pope who used to be with the Ministry of Defense. When we had the Alton Barnes event, where there was an interstellar vehicle that materialized in the field and was floating towards us at the wee hours of the morning, MOD found out about it, and Colin Andrews was contacted by Nick Pope when he was working there and said, would you come to London for a meeting? I said, sure. So that I met him when he was still in that office. But he admitted he just gathered intelligence and kicked it upstairs, and it went into a black hole. He had no idea where it went. And he admitted that. And that's when he was still working there. So, and perhaps he still works for them, I don't know. But the point I'm making is it's highly, highly compartmentalized. So when the French first approached me, I'm giving you this background so there's some context of understanding why and how this happened. They first contacted us through some very prominent French diplomats. And who said to me, look, we're very interested in pursuing this for peaceful purposes, because I made it very clear I would not be involved in an operation that militarized the contact or had any weapon systems on site or involved, except to keep the bad guys away from us, including radar systems, air support, naval support, ground forces, special forces. And that's what I requested. And they said, fine, we'll do it. And what ended up happening is that they were gathering information on what was really going on the subject in the United States, and to an extent indirectly in the UK. And they found out, of course, something that they didn't think was possible, because it sounds like a bad John le Carre novel or a conspiracy theory. And I wrote to them and then had some phone calls and said, look, what you have to understand is that in the United States, between, and this was back then, 100 and 200 billion US dollars a year go unaccounted for in the Department of Defense and intelligence community. No one even knows where it's going. As you know from the film Serious, Donald Rumsfeld himself, no flaming liberal, he said there was $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budget. Now the estimates are around $8.5 trillion. 14 years later after 9/11. Trillion. So the bottom line is America, the United States of America, loses and can account for more money each year than the entire Eurozone and Great Britain together's military budgets. And actually more than the budget of China, which just hit 110 billion this year, which is a rounding error in the United States. I mean, nobody notices 110 billion. Nobody notices that at all. Our budget is $5 trillion in the United States government. So that's the problem. It is such a corrupt morass. And I'm a proud American. My mother's family were, I'm sorry to say this in London, some of the original founders of the United States fighting the British, but we love you now. But God bless all. But she used to go on and on about that, because in America you have these old dowagers who are daughters of the American Revolution, and they're very crudmudgeons. And my dad is half Cherokee Indian, Native Americans, and he says, what the hell, woman? My people are waiting for the Mayflower to get here. Yeah. I said, touche. But that's, when you look at that kind of spending that is unaccounted for, and it isn't as if the president has access to those projects, or your prime minister for the component that is going on in the United Kingdom, or most ministers of defense and most CI directors. But some do and some don't. And the ones who do, it's because they came up through the ranks and they did what I call a soul biopsy. I'm a trauma doctor, so I use medical analogies. So, if you want to take a biopsy of something to look at it, so they do an analysis of the person's values, beliefs, and ultimately it's whether they'll go along with the agenda of secrecy and criminality. Because when I presented this situation to your former Minister of Defense, Lord Hill Norton, and I'm sitting at his cottage, and he's this old guy, steely blue eyes, and he said, why wouldn't they have told me? And he was hurt and a bit peeved, actually, mad, and his pride was hurt. I mean, imagine being in that position and being kept in the dark about the biggest secret in history. And he knew by then it was all true. And I said, well, let me answer your question with a question. What would you have done if you had found that there was an illegal, super secret, unacknowledged special access project, transnational, not international, transnational, transects geopolitical boundaries, that is sitting on the technologies that would give us a new civilization without poverty or pollution, that they have enforced the secrecy through murder, mayhem, lies, deception, and intimidation, up to and including high officials in governments, both governments, including your government. He said, I wouldn't have stood for it for a bloody minute. And he was just like in a lather. And I said, that's why they didn't tell you. They didn't tell you. So if you're someone who is fundamentally an honest and good person, they're not going to read you into this. That's military speak for brief you. They're not going to get read into a project like this. So when I began to explain how utterly, completely dysfunctional the American military-industrial, laboratory, corporate, financial system is, and how deep black it actually operates. Anything important almost never is brought to the attention of the President of the United States. I can say this with some real solid authority, or your Prime Minister, Cameron Brown. Isn't that who he is? Yeah. For now. So those are placeholders. It's a little bit like the Truman Show. Everybody see the movie in the Truman Show? You have people who are, it's sort of the thing with Jim Carrey where he's living this world and it all ends up to be a set and it's all fake. I don't know. It's a great movie to look. It's a great, interesting parallel to this. And so the Truman Show is pretty much what our normal political system is, including most of the good people who are in your Ministry of Defense, intelligence community, politicians, etc. It's an extremely tightly compartmented operation that's very well funded. The other part to understand is nothing important of any strategic significance is above the surface of the earth. If it's above ground level, it's not really that important. It's fungible, replaceable. Everything critical is underground bases, all throughout the United States, Australia, Pine Gap, and also here in the UK. So anything that is critically important is not sitting above ground. You're not going to see it with a spy satellite. You're not going to see it from an aircraft. And access is multiple levels of entry. I've been in a couple places like this. So that's basically how it's managed. Super secret, illegally, and they tell the people they think they can manipulate. But they will tell certain people a little bit of information if they think they can manipulate them by giving them a little piece of it, usually a distorted piece. We had a president named Reagan, who put all this effort into the SDI Star Wars initiative, which is really a cover story for putting platforms in space targeting interstellar vehicles, which is what we're doing. It really had nothing to do with brilliant pebbles. That was all just a cover story. The real money was going into interstellar targeting and tracking of these ET craft and shooting them down, which we've been doing for a very long time. And they told him just enough information in a xenophobic way, in a way that was scary, to get his cooperation with that project. And that's why at the UN, if you Google it, you'll see that Reagan said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity and peace be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? Very familiar theme. Douglas MacArthur in 1950s, his last address to the Congress said, World War III will be interplanetary. This has been planned since I was 1 year old. I just turned 60 in June. Still bench 410. Anyway, but I know, I'm very eccentric about my workouts. But that's the problem, is that this secrecy has to do with another whole issue, and that is creating the psychological propaganda and the juggernaut so that people will accept the cost of the next level of militarizing the planet. Going from, and actually Wernher von Braun said, it would go from the Cold War to nations of concern, rogue states, to global terrorism. This was all in the disclosure stuff before 9/11. And then objects in space that could be a threat. You hear all this stuff about asteroids and stuff, to playing the final card, the alien threat, of which there is none. But it'd be great if people could be convinced there is, because they could support then, instead of $1 trillion a year coming into the military system, it could be 5 trillion or 6 trillion or 8 trillion, because the whole world, like the movie Independence Day, would unite. Let's kick alien butt. You see? It's jingoism of the worst kind of propaganda and brainwashing, which 99.9% of people who study the UFO subject have been completely infected with. And that creates its own problem, because ultimately, if you're going to have the public approach this subject in a way that's going to be helpful, it doesn't help to trade humans fighting with each other like murderous monkeys that we have for thousands of years, to starting to fight within other planetary systems. This is not progress. So progress requires a more universal outlook based in the concepts of cosmic awareness and universal peace. It cannot break down into, oh, well, yes, we're not alone in the universe, but by the way, there's some out here we need to be fighting. Why? Because if we do that, it's the end of the world, period. It really is. You're talking about weapon systems that are scalar electromagnetic systems that go beyond the speed of light. You know what a scalar is? Or longitudinal? Everybody know what this is? I'm going too far, too fast. Well, a quick course in it. The light you see in this room has a wave component, right? And it's 186,000 miles per second. That's how it travels. A longitudinal scalar is not a wave, but longitudinal in a point, and it's at multiples of the speed of light. You weaponize that, you got something. And the United States has weaponized it. So that's the systems that they're using to track, target interstellars as they come through the crossing point of light, step down from other dimensions into this dimension, hit it, boom, down they go. You hear of all these crash retrievals that have happened over the year, that's how they've happened. And I know exactly what the technologies are. I know men who've worked on the systems and operated them, much to their regret. And this then requires some people in governments and the grassroots to say, let's find a better way of making contact. Let's not recreate the mistakes of the last few thousand years, because a new era has opened, the hallmark of which is universal peace, not interstellar war.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the next one right here on the Best of Dr. Stephen Greer.